Minutes before my granddaughter's vows, I heard the groom spit out something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. What came next was a quiet trap that cost him his freedom and saved our legacy. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're tuning in from. Let's see how far justice rides. You know, I've been walking this earth for 73 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of snake that slithers through tall grass. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And that mistake nearly cost my family everything we built over 4 generations on this ranch. Everything my grandfather bled into this soil, everything my father died protecting, everything I'd spent my whole damn life preserving, almost gone because I didn't want to believe what my gut was screaming at me. The pain still sits in my chest like a red-hot coal when I think about that golden afternoon in September. Prairie wind was rattling the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Chapel, and I was watching my granddaughter Sarah prepare to marry what I thought was a decent man. The chapel was full of faces I'd known since they were kids, neighbors who'd helped us through droughts and floods, families whose children had grown up riding horses on our land, people who understood what it meant to work with your hands and keep your word. I should have been the proudest man alive. Instead, I felt like I was watching a lamb walk into a slaughterhouse, and I couldn't put my finger on why. See, I've lived long enough to know when a storm's coming, even under blue skies. My bones ache before the rain hits, my chest tightens when trouble's brewing, and that day, every instinct I'd honed over 7 decades was screaming danger. But who's going to listen to an old rancher's feelings when there's a wedding to celebrate? The groom, Marcus, had been courting Sarah for 2 years. Clean-cut boy from the city, claimed he worked in finance, always dressed sharp and talked smooth. Said all the right things about wanting to settle down, raise a family, maybe even help out on the ranch. My daughter Emma, Sarah's mother, she was smitten with the idea of her daughter marrying a successful businessman. Dad, she'd say, Sarah deserves someone who can take care of her, someone with ambition. And I wanted to believe it too. God knows I wanted to believe my granddaughter was getting the life she deserved. But something about Marcus never sat right with me. The way his eyes would dart around when he talked about his work, how he'd change the subject whenever I asked specific questions about his business, the way he seemed more interested in touring our property lines than getting to know our family traditions. And the friends he brought around, slick city boys who looked at our ranch like they were appraising livestock. Still, I kept my mouth shut because I'd learned the hard way that speaking up about a woman's choice in men usually just pushes her closer to him. The morning of the wedding, I was helping set up chairs in the chapel when I heard voices coming from the groom's preparation room. The door was cracked open maybe 6 inches, and I was walking past when Marcus's voice cut through the air like a blade. Boys, I'm not marrying the woman, I'm marrying the land and the bank accounts. This little farm girl comes with about $3 million in real estate and another $2 million in liquid assets. Best investment I ever made. I stopped dead in my tracks, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. His friends were cackling like hyenas, and one of them said, "You're a cold bastard, Marcus. What happens when she figures it out?" And Marcus, God damn his soul, he laughed and said, "By then I'll own half of everything. Her grandfather's too old to fight me, and her mother's too grateful to question anything. This whole family's been waiting for someone like me to rescue them from their simple little lives." The insult landed like a branding iron pressed to my heart. Every word seared itself into my memory, and I stood there frozen, gripping the back of a pew until my knuckles went white. 60 years I'd spent building something meaningful on this land. 60 years of 16-hour days, of sleeping in the barn during calving season, of mortgaging everything I owned to keep us afloat during the drought of '98. 60 years of teaching my daughter and granddaughter that hard work and integrity meant something, that our family name stood for something in this community. And this parasite was going to steal it all while pretending to love the most precious thing in my life. I wanted to kick down that door and drag him out by his lying throat. I wanted to stand up in that chapel and tell everyone exactly what kind of man was about to take my granddaughter's name. But I also knew that if I went in there swinging, I'd look like the crazy old man trying to ruin his granddaughter's happiness. So I memorized every word, every laugh, every detail of that conversation, and I started planning. First, I had to try the direct approach. I found my daughter Emma in the bridal preparation room, helping Sarah with her veil. Emma looked radiant. She'd been planning this wedding for months, and everything was perfect. The flowers, the music, the dress that had cost more than most people make in a month. I pulled her aside and said, "Emma, I need to talk to you. Right now. It's about Marcus." The look she gave me could have stopped a charging bull. "Dad, don't you dare. Not today. I know you have your reservations, but Sarah loves him, and he makes her happy. Whatever you're thinking, just keep it to yourself for one more hour." "Emma, listen to me," I said, grabbing her arm. "I heard something. Something that changes everything. We need to stop this wedding." She pulled away from me like I'd slapped her. "Stop it? Dad, are you out of your mind? There are 200 people out there. The photographer, the caterer, the musicians, everything's paid for. Sarah's been dreaming of this day since she was little." I tried to tell her what I'd heard, but she wouldn't listen. She looked at me with such disappointment, such anger, that it cut deeper than Marcus's words had. "Dad, I love you, but if you try to ruin this day for Sarah, I'll never forgive you. Never. She's been through enough heartbreak, and she deserves this happiness." Sarah was sitting at the mirror, and she looked up when she heard our voices getting heated. Her face was glowing with joy, and she looked so much like her grandmother on our wedding day that it took my breath away. "Grandpa," she said, her voice shaking a little, "what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I walked over to her, took her hands in mine, and looked into those trusting brown eyes. "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I think you should wait. Just wait a little while before you marry Marcus. There are some things about him that—" "Grandpa, stop." She pulled her hands away, and I could see tears starting to form. "I know you're worried about me. I know you think I'm making a mistake, but I love him. He loves me. He wants to build a life here, with our family. Isn't that what you always wanted? Someone who would appreciate what we have." Her best friend Jessica was sitting beside her, and she stood up with fire in her eyes. "Mr. Patterson, with all due respect, this is just pre-wedding nerves. Sarah's been planning this for 2 years. Marcus has been nothing but wonderful to your family. You can't ask her to throw all that away because you have a bad feeling." Before I could say another word, the wedding coordinator knocked on the door. "Ladies, it's time. The music's starting, and the guests are ready." Emma grabbed my arm and steered me toward the door. "Dad, whatever's going on in your head, you need to let it go. This is Sarah's day, and you're going to walk her down that aisle with a smile on your face, or so help me God, I'll have you escorted out." So I watched my granddaughter take my arm, radiant in her grandmother's pearls and her mother's dress, and I walked her down that aisle feeling like I was leading her to the gallows. The chapel looked like something out of a fairy tale, white roses and baby's breath everywhere, candles flickering like stars, sunlight streaming through those old stained glass windows and painting everything in gold and blue. But all I could hear was Marcus's laughter echoing in my head. All I could see was the predatory smile on his face as he watched my little girl walk toward him. The ceremony proceeded like a beautiful nightmare. Marcus played his part perfectly, choking up during his vows, promising to honor and cherish Sarah for better or worse, until death do them part. The pastor spoke about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Sarah's voice was clear and strong as she promised to love this man who was planning to rob her blind. And I stood there in the front pew, watching it all happen, knowing I was the only person in that room who understood what was really taking place. After the ceremony, during the reception, I tried to talk to anyone who would listen. But the narrative had already started forming, and it wasn't in my favor. I heard whispers behind my back, "Old Patterson's having a hard time letting go, he's always been overprotective, Marcus seems like such a nice young man, and the old man's just being controlling." By the time the cake was cut and the first dance was over, half the town thought I was the problem. The man trying to keep his granddaughter on the farm, unable to accept that she'd found happiness with an outsider. The next few weeks were torture. Sarah and Marcus moved into the guest house on our property while they looked for their own place. Emma was so angry with me for trying to disrupt the wedding that she barely spoke to me. And Marcus, that son of a bitch, he played the perfect son-in-law. Helping with chores, asking questions about ranch management, talking about his plans to invest in our operation and help us modernize. Every conversation was like swallowing glass, but I smiled and nodded and waited for him to make his next move. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks after the wedding, I came home from checking on the north pasture to find Sarah and Marcus in the kitchen, papers spread out across the table like a card game. Marcus was leaning over her shoulder, his hand guiding hers as she signed document after document. Just routine paperwork, he was saying in that smooth voice of his. Estate planning, insurance beneficiaries, joint accounts, stuff every married couple needs to handle. I know it's boring, sweetheart, but we want to make sure everything's organized. I walked closer, trying to look casual, and saw my ranch's name on several of the documents. Our property deed, our business accounts, power of attorney forms. Sarah was signing her life away, and she didn't even know it. Marcus looked up and saw me watching, and for just a second, his mask slipped. I saw the cold calculation in his eyes, the satisfaction of a predator who knows his trap is working perfectly. "Hey, Grandpa," Sarah said, looking up with that innocent smile. "Marcus is helping me get all my legal stuff straightened out. Apparently, I should have done this years ago." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Mind if I take a look? I'm curious about how these modern financial arrangements work." Marcus was up and gathering the papers before I could take another step. "Actually, we're not quite finished here. Lot of boring legal language that would probably put you to sleep. Why don't you let us wrap this up, and then Sarah can explain everything to you later." But I'd seen enough. In those few seconds, I'd glimpsed papers that made my blood run cold. Our ranch was being used as collateral for loans I'd never authorized. Power of attorney that would give Marcus control over decisions I'd never agreed to make. Investment accounts that were being transferred into joint holdings where he'd have access to everything. That night, after Sarah and Marcus had gone to bed, I went into my office and photographed every document I could find in Sarah's desk. My hands were steadier than they'd been in years. Funny how clarity can calm your nerves. I realigned every stack exactly as I'd found it, keeping my poker face intact even though inside I was screaming. At 3 a.m, I sent an email to Jonathan Hendricks, the lawyer who'd handled our family's legal affairs for 30 years. The subject line was simple: "Tell me I'm wrong." I attached the photos and wrote one sentence: "Review these documents and call me as soon as you can." Jonathan called me at 6 a.m., and I could hear the alarm in his voice even before he spoke. "Robert, what the hell is going on out there? These signatures would hand over control of your entire estate. The loans are structured so that your ranch is collateral for investments that could bankrupt you. If Sarah signed all of these, and if they're legally valid, your family could lose everything." "Are they valid?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They appear to be. Sarah's signature looks authentic, and they're properly notarized. But Robert, some of these documents, they're designed to look routine while actually transferring massive amounts of control. This isn't sloppy paperwork, this is sophisticated fraud. Someone with serious financial knowledge structured these transactions." I told Jonathan what I'd overheard at the wedding, and there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Finally," he said, "we need to document everything and move carefully. If we're going to stop this, we need more evidence than overheard conversations and suspicious paperwork. We need proof of intent to defraud, and we need to catch them in the act." "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Keep quiet, gather more evidence, and whatever you do, don't let Sarah sign anything else. Can you do that without arousing suspicion?" For the next 2 weeks, I played the role of the happy grandfather while secretly documenting every conversation, every document, every interaction between Sarah and Marcus. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Tommy Rodriguez who specialized in financial crimes and knew how to work both back roads and big city ledgers. Tommy was the son of one of our seasonal workers, a kid who'd grown up on ranches but went to college and became a forensic accountant. If anyone could unravel Marcus's scheme, it was Tommy. The evidence Tommy uncovered made my stomach turn. Photographs of Marcus with a blonde woman in expensive restaurants, hotel receipts for romantic getaways that happened while Sarah thought he was traveling for business, and most damning of all, audio recordings from a surveillance device Tommy had planted in Marcus's car. In those recordings, Marcus laid out his entire plan to a business partner, describing exactly how he was going to steal our ranch and mocking Sarah's trust in him. "The girl's so naive, she'd sign her own death warrant if I told her it was a love letter," Marcus said in one recording. "And the old man's too proud to admit he's been outmaneuvered by a city boy. By the time they figure out what's happening, I'll own everything and they'll be working for me." But Tommy's most valuable discovery was Marcus's estranged brother, David. Apparently, Marcus had pulled a similar scheme 5 years earlier, stealing his brother's construction business through fraudulent contracts and forged documents. David had lost everything, his company, his house, his marriage, and had been living quietly in a small town about 2 hours away, working as a handyman and trying to rebuild his life. I met David at a roadhouse called Murphy's, a dim place where truckers and ranch hands could drink beer and tell stories without anyone asking too many questions. David was a smaller, quieter version of Marcus. Same dark hair and sharp features, but with eyes that had seen too much disappointment. When I showed him the evidence Tommy had gathered, those eyes filled with a rage I recognized. "I tried to warn people about Marcus 5 years ago," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody believed me. He's that good at playing the victim, at making himself look like the wounded party. By the time I could prove what he'd done, he'd already destroyed my business and disappeared with everything. Will you help me stop him?" I asked. David stared into his beer for a long time before answering. "I've been waiting 5 years for a chance to make him pay for what he did to my family. What do you need?" Together, we built a case that would have made federal prosecutors proud. Tommy's evidence, David's testimony about the previous fraud, and the documents I'd photographed created a clear pattern of criminal behavior. But the hardest part was still ahead. We had to present this evidence without destroying Sarah in the process. Jonathan filed the papers on a Tuesday morning in October. Fraud, conspiracy, breach of trust, criminal impersonation, the charges read like a prosecutor's greatest hits. Marcus and his accomplice, a notary named Stevens who'd been falsifying documents, were named as defendants. The courtroom filled with neighbors and friends, people who'd known our family for generations and had watched this drama unfold. Sarah arrived with Jessica still clinging to her arm, both of them looking confused and frightened. Emma sat beside me, her face pale but determined. She'd finally listened to the evidence, and the reality of what had almost happened was hitting her like a physical blow. The lawyer laid out the money trail with the precision of a surgeon, showing exactly how Marcus had planned to transfer our assets into accounts he controlled. Then he played the audio recordings, and I watched my granddaughter's face crumble as she heard her husband's voice describing her as a naive fool and mocking our family's trust. "The girl's so naive, she'd sign her own death warrant if I told her it was a love letter." Marcus's recorded voice filled the courtroom, and Sarah pulled away from Jessica like she'd been burned. For the first time, she was seeing her friend's role in this betrayal, how Jessica had discouraged her from asking questions, had insisted that the paperwork was routine, had helped isolate Sarah from family members who might have protected her. David took the stand and testified about his own experience with Marcus's schemes. He described losing his construction business, his house, his marriage, everything he'd worked for, to the same kind of fraudulent documents that Sarah had been signing. "My brother is a predator," David said, looking directly at Marcus for the first time in 5 years. "He targets people who have something he wants, and he destroys them systematically. This pattern doesn't stop until someone stops him." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts for Marcus. Guilty on charges of fraud and conspiracy for Stevens the notary. As the verdicts were read, I watched Marcus's face transform from arrogant confidence to shocked disbelief to pure rage. His banker mistress, who'd been sitting in the back of the courtroom, walked past him in the hallway afterward and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're no use to me now." Just like that, she discarded him like a broken tool. Jessica slipped out of the courtroom with her head bowed, facing a wall of disappointment from neighbors who trusted her to protect Sarah. She left town 3 days later, and I haven't heard her name spoken since. But the real moment that mattered came when Sarah walked up to me after the sentencing. Her face was streaked with tears, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I almost lost everything you and Daddy and Great-Grandpa built. I almost gave it all away to someone who thought I was a joke." I wrapped my arms around her and held her while she sobbed. "Sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. Love makes us vulnerable, that's what makes it worth having. The only person who should be sorry is the man who betrayed that love." Emma stood beside us, tears streaming down her face, and said, "Dad, I should have listened to you. I should have trusted your instincts instead of worrying about appearances and keeping everyone happy. We all wanted to believe the best," I told her. "That's not a weakness, that's what makes us human. But now we know better, and now we'll be stronger." The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Sarah moved back into the main house on the ranch, and I started teaching her everything I knew about managing our operation. She learned the ledgers and the soil reports, the grain prices and the weather patterns. She negotiated fair deals with our suppliers and earned the respect of our crew through hard work and straight talk. More importantly, she started rebuilding her sense of self-worth. She took up horseback riding again, something she'd loved as a child but had given up because Marcus thought it was too rustic. She started wearing jeans and boots instead of the expensive dresses he'd preferred. She learned to trust her own judgment again, to speak up when something didn't feel right, to value her own opinions over someone else's approval. Marcus and Stevens are both serving their sentences in federal prison. The last I heard, Marcus was working in the prison laundry and had been denied parole twice. His banking connections and city sophistication don't mean much when you're wearing an orange jumpsuit and eating institutional food. David visits him occasionally, not out of forgiveness, but to remind him that his victims are still standing while he's locked away. The whole experience taught me something I should have known already: red flags ignored become wrecking balls. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. When your instincts are screaming danger, listen to them even if it means having difficult conversations or making people angry. Love needs truth to survive, and legacy needs guardians who are willing to fight for it. I spent so many years trying to keep peace, trying to avoid conflict, trying to let the women in my family make their own decisions without interference. But there's a difference between respecting someone's independence and abandoning them to predators. Sometimes love means speaking up even when you know it's going to hurt, even when you know it's going to make you the villain in someone else's story. If you're hurting in silence, if you're seeing red flags that everyone else is ignoring, if you know something's wrong but you're afraid to speak up, don't wait. Quiet courage saves families. Truth-telling saves lives. Sometimes being the crazy old man who ruins the party is exactly what your family needs. I look at Sarah now, strong and confident and running this ranch with more skill than I ever had, and I know we did the right thing. She's dating a veterinarian from the next county, a man who loves her for who she is, not what she owns. A man who asks her opinion about everything and respects her answers. A man who sees our ranch as her heritage, not his opportunity. The pain of that day in the chapel, the rage I felt listening to Marcus mock our family, the fear that we might lose everything, it's all still there. But it's balanced now by the knowledge that we fought back, that we protected what mattered, that we refused to let a predator destroy 4 generations of honest work. Some people say I should forgive Marcus, that holding on to anger isn't healthy for an old man like me. But you know what? Some things shouldn't be forgiven. Some betrayals are so complete, so calculated, so cruel that they deserve to be remembered. My anger keeps me sharp, keeps me vigilant, reminds me that evil often comes dressed in a nice suit with a charming smile. I've learned that peace isn't always possible, and it isn't always desirable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is go to war for the people you care about. Sometimes the most important battle you'll ever fight is the one that saves your family from their own trust and generosity. The ranch is safe now. Sarah's safe now. Our legacy is intact, stronger than ever because we fought for it instead of just hoping it would survive. And every morning when I walk out onto this land that my grandfather cleared with his own hands, when I see cattle grazing on grass that 4 generations of Pattersons have tended, when I watch Sarah making decisions that honor our past while building our future, I know that sometimes being the mean old bastard who doesn't trust anybody is exactly what your family needs. Now I need to ask you something: would you keep the peace, or light the truth? What would you have done in my boots? Because I guarantee you, there's a Marcus in your community somewhere, looking for his next victim, counting on good people's desire to avoid conflict. The question is whether you'll have the courage to be the one who stands up and says, "Not in my family. Not on my watch." This story isn't over, it's just the first chapter in learning how to protect what matters. Subscribe if you want to hear about 2 more real-life reckonings, 2 more times when quiet people decided they'd had enough and fought back against the bullies trying to destroy their lives. Because the truth is, evil only wins when good people decide it's easier to look the other way. Remember, names and places in this story have been changed to protect privacy, but every word of what happened is true. Sometimes reality is stranger and more terrible than any fiction you could imagine. But sometimes, if you're willing to fight for it, justice is real too. Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels, how many people understand that standing up to predators isn't optional, it's the price we pay for protecting the people we love.